What Donald Trump is saying about his immigration plans, plus the $100 billion ask. Will the battered Southeast finally get more help? That's Topping the Hill on NewsNation tonight. Do you think the military could be used?
Well, I do. I think desperate times call for desperate measures. The challenge we have, very frankly, is going to be finding and rounding these people up because they're being dispersed around the country, and DHS is not tracking them.
Now, the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, telling me here on the Hill back in May that he supported the idea of using the United States military to carry out potentially a deportation program. And today, President-elect Trump suggested that is exactly what could happen. In a social media post, Trump confirmed his administration is prepared to declare a national emergency and use military assets to deport illegal immigrants. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation, a live look across the Intercoastal in Palm Beach, Florida, Mar-a-Lago, Trump transition headquarters, as there is now a theme, you could say, with the transition. We saw all sorts of appointments last week when it comes to the security of this country, global affairs, both foreign and domestic. But as of this moment, President-elect Trump has yet to make a selection on the key players who could have a day-to-day impact on your bank account. Tonight, the president is still weighing who will be the Treasury Secretary and other key leaders on his economic team. That search, we are learning, isn't getting smaller, it's broadening. Our Allie Bradley live along the southern border tonight with what day one immigration policies could look like. But we begin tonight with our Robert Sherman on the battle for one of the biggest unfilled jobs in this country. Robert?
Yeah, biggest is absolutely right, Blake, especially when you consider the fact for the last few months, you've heard the president-elect talking about the issue of the economy so extensively on the campaign trail with a big focus on a lot of these issues, such as tariffs and inflation rates. This is a key position that we're talking about in his upcoming administration. And up to this point, there were two names that we were really hearing floated around almost exclusively to any others. One of them was Scott Bessent, a hedge fund manager, and the other one, Howard Lutnick, who you also know is a co-chair of the transition team. But there's been a lot of reporting that this scope has been expanding here, and a couple of other names that have started to come into the conversation. One of them is going to be Kevin Warsh, who served on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and Mark Rowan, head of a private equity firm known as Apollo. The sources have been able to confirm that this scope is expanding and that Rowan will have a meeting here at Mar-a-Lago this week in order to talk about the possibility of this position. But sources also indicate these might not be the only names. There could be more coming. There could be a quote-unquote dark horse candidate coming at some point. Still a lot of uncertainty here. And the reason that we're in this situation is that, one, very important position here, but the other is that the president-elect is really focused in on finding someone who thinks like him when it comes to these economic issues, particularly the issue of tariffs, something that he has indicated he's prepared to be very aggressive on, especially when it comes to other countries such as China, in hopes of leveling the playing field. So finding someone who meets him on that philosophy, that is very top of mind here. Blake?
Hey, Robert, I hope you checked your phone in about the last 2 minutes or so, because Donald Trump just posted moments ago that former Congressman Sean Duffy, host on the Fox Business Network as well, currently is his pick to be the Secretary of Transportation. That just coming in as you were speaking. Had you heard his name floated around at all?
No, not too much, but the Secretary of Transportation position is not one that we've seen top of mind here compared to a lot of these other positions, whether it was Attorney General, whether it was Secretary of Treasury. But, you hear what the president-elect is saying again, putting an emphasis on the economy, putting an emphasis on someone who speaks to the conservative and Republican Party stances here, certainly putting together a coalition of people thinking like him.
All right,
Blake.
Our Robert Sherman staying on his toes out there outside of Mar-a-Lago. Robert, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Now, there is one thing on President-elect Trump's agenda that he is definite on at this moment, the border. Trump planning on day one to conduct what he is calling mass deportations by declaring potentially a national emergency and using military assets. Now, Trump confirming the report on his platform, Truth Social, by posting simply, quote, "True. Our Allie Bradley, live in Del Rio, Texas, with the very latest. Allie?
Yeah, hey, Blake, we can expect the president-elect to get started on his biggest campaign promise of these mass deportations on day one, likely calling for that national emergency, bringing in the military to carry out these mass deportations. Now, we know that the president-elect has tapped his former ICE director, Tom Homan, and literally created a position calling him the border czar here. So he's going to be at the helm of these mass deportations. And when it comes to these deportations, they're talking about prioritizing these criminals, right? They're going to go after the people. There's more than 1 million that have a final order of removal. There's hundreds of thousands that have been convicted of crimes here. But here's the thing. Homan goes on Cuomo and he says, but remember, crossing the border is a crime illegally. So no one is really exempt from these mass deportations, but they are going to go after those criminals first. Now, Republican lawmakers say they understand the move. They support the president-elect's decision to do these mass deportations, but they still don't know how it's going to look. They don't know how the military is going to be used. Take a listen to what Tony Gonzalez had to say.
The devil's always in the details, right? What are these military folks going to be doing? How are we going to use them properly? But overall, I mean, as this plan is coming together, I think it's very positive.
So how is the military going to be used, Blake? We already know Texas has been using soldiers down here for years. They've been a deterrent, though. So has the DOD. Biden has had soldiers down here, too. But they're a deterrent. So now these individuals are going to be the interior. No one stayed at the border, you guys. This isn't going to happen down here. There likely will be some activity, but it's going to happen in the interior. And how are the military going to be used? That remains to be seen, Blake.
All right, our Allie Bradley live for us once again in Del Rio, Texas this evening. Allie, thank you. So President-elect Trump is turning his attention now to the jobs in his new administration that will have the most day-to-day impact on your money. One of his main focuses of his economic agenda is his proposal of potentially slapping 60% tariffs on Chinese goods. Now, NewsNation is told the president-elect wants a Treasury secretary who is strongly in favor of his views on tariffs. Here in Washington, the top Republican on the bipartisan China Select Committee in the House is now touting the idea of revoking China's free trade status with the United States. Congressman John Molinar is the chairman of the House Select China Committee. Republican from the state of Michigan joins us live here on the Hill. Congressman, thanks for being with us tonight. Appreciate the time, sir. Explain to me what exactly you're trying to do and what does it mean?
Well, our plan is to revoke the permanent normal trade relationship status of China. Since China entered this agreement with the United States and the world, they've cheated on every aspect. They've stolen intellectual property. They've committed all sorts of violations, dumping, overcapacity, and they simply are not a favored trading partner, and we shouldn't give them that privileged position. We're also recommending tariffs, especially on some of the sensitive technologies and sectors, and we need to make this trading relationship fair. And okay. I believe President Trump is stepping up and doing that.
So you know how Donald Trump works. You remember the first quote-unquote trade war back in 2018, 2019, 2020. Everything is a negotiation with Donald Trump, or at least at the beginning. Do you know if he embraces your idea? Because if so, that would be a pretty big step forward to start off a negotiation.
Well, I can tell you that conceptually, he wants to be tough with China and make sure this relationship is put in the right direction. We need a reset. And he's talked about tariffs as an important, vital component of that. Okay. Strategic technologies, we need to make sure we protect. So I'm not here to say he's endorsing it, but it certainly is in line with his thinking. And I look forward to working with him and his administration to implement this.
Speaking of tariffs, here was the then candidate Trump on Joe Rogan's podcast in the final days of the campaign. I'll get your reaction on the other side.
I came up with this idea that honestly nobody ever heard of. And now, it took her 2 months, but you know what? All of a sudden...
Well, it caught fire.
And she just put it into a little speech.
Yep.
That was the wrong soundbite, Congressman. What I was trying to play for you there was the question from Joe Rogan when he asked about the idea of getting rid of taxes for tariffs completely, sort of like a one-to-one swap. Do you think Trump is serious about that? Do you believe that his Treasury Secretary is going to fall in line with him on his views on tariffs?
I believe his Treasury Secretary will implement the Trump policy, And I believe the Trump policy is going to be to have a strong negotiating position with respect to China.
But I wonder if his policy on tariffs, I wonder if his policy on tariffs is why he's having a little bit of trouble trying to find a Treasury Secretary.
I don't believe that. I think he's just trying to select the right person for the job, and there are a number of qualified candidates, and he's going to pick the best one that fits his agenda and can implement it working with Congress.
We had one of the United States' top trade negotiators in the first go-around, Cleet Willems, here on the show a couple weeks ago, and I asked him what essentially Donald Trump and his team learned from China in the first go-around. Here's what Cleet told me, and I want to get your reaction on the other side.
They learned that he's serious.
Okay.
Right? They learned that when he makes these kinds of threats about broad-scale tariff action, he may just well pull that trigger. And so I think China has to take him seriously again and is going to have to engage.
We're also seeing stories, Congressman, about Nerf guns, possibly, and Hasbro maybe reducing its footprint in China. Steve Madden has already reduced its footprint in China. Is that what you think we're going to see here as companies start to look across, see the landscape, see what Donald Trump and his team are talking about?
My hope is that we'd have more supply chains, more manufacturing, more job creation here in the United States, lessen our dependence on the Chinese Communist Party. And I think that's what his policies will encourage.
All right, we'll leave it there. Congressman John Molinar, he is the top Republican on the China Select Committee in the House, live with us here on the Hill. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, you got it. Still to come here on the Hill. Trump said he wants to drill, baby, drill. I'll show you where that likely will and won't happen in the upcoming years. Plus, is a Trump about to interview with Ron DeSantis? What the governor is now saying about Florida's open Senate seat. And from the NFL to UFC, if you watch sports this weekend, you probably saw a little bit of that. Welcome to Washington. This is the center of politics. I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. We're back in 4. All right, welcome back here to The Hill on NewsNation. If there's another conclusion from this month's election, it may be that the marriages of blue urban and red rural areas under one state roof are in trouble. Illinois, California, 2 states where huge regions of rural Republican counties are governed side by side with a few large Democratic urban cities. As a result, some residents are pushing back to break off, and form their own states. A highly unlikely possibility, but a statement about how the divide in our country is growing. On Election Day, for example, 33 of Illinois' 102 counties voted to pass a non-binding resolution to create a new Illinois. Here's the map, for example, proposed. It essentially separates the whole state from the Chicago metro area. A proposed new California also looks similar, with the majority of the states separating from Los Angeles, the Bay Area, Sacramento as well. Now, of course, the kind of divorce wouldn't be easy. Becoming a new state would require the consent of current state legislatures and Congress. That hasn't happened since Maine did it back in 1820, breaking off from Massachusetts. Full panel here with me for a moment. Nan Hayworth, the former Republican Congresswoman from New York. Niall Stanage, White House columnist for TheHill.com. Kelly Meyer, NewsNation Washington correspondent. Scott Bolden, NewsNation political contributor. Hello to you all.
Hello.
Nice to have you in. So it's not like this is happening, right?
Right.
Not going to happen. But here's the bigger point.
There is a way, though.
There is a way. I'm not denying or doubting that there's a way.
I knew she was going to say that.
But here's the bigger point. I wonder if you look at, for example, someone like a Glenn Youngkin in Virginia and how he won. Rural, suburbs, disaffected Democrats. Yes. I'm looking at Lee Zeldin in New York, your hometown. He lost the governorship by 6 points. Yeah. And you wonder if there's a path forward there for Republicans like that I just mentioned.
I agree, Blake. And President Trump. I mean, his coalition, look how he brought in disaffected Democrats. He brought in young people. He brought in, in fact, he brought in suburbanites as well in the end. I think it can be done. I think states can be more united. One thing I would suggest states consider, though, is an electoral college of counties, analogous to the electoral college we have of states at the federal level. And if you had an electoral college of counties, in states that have these contentious relationships, it would even the playing field without having to create a new state. Because
but that might be
that would
more
be very difficult,
wouldn't it? So, because you'd have to change the Constitution. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Here's the larger.
Do that either way.
Here's the larger point, though. California, for example, D plus 31 in 2020, Scott. D plus 17 D plus 21 last go around. Illinois, D17 to D11. There's been a shift to the right. I can show you Massachusetts, a 9-point shift. New York State, an 11-point shift. New Jersey, a 10-point shift. And I just wonder if you're going to see more of these Glenn Youngkin, maybe a Lee Zeldin type pull more of these off.
You're looking at it through a political prism. If you really read the research on this Wall Street Journal article, it really was about money and resources. For example, in the state of Illinois, the biggest push for where I'm from, Joliet, Illinois, they're pushing, not Joliet, but some of these other communities, they're pushing to get a new Illinois because financially the city hasn't balanced its budget in probably 20 years. They have a $3 billion budget deficit, and they haven't balanced their budget in several years. My father was a retired judge there, and I got to tell you, he had a pension that would rival many of us in working in middle-class America, and he was retired.
Are these folks onto something?
Well, here's what I think is worrisome about it. You used in your introduction the metaphor of marriage and divorce, right? What's happening here is rural areas saying there is no chance of reconciliation with our liberal urban people. We therefore have to separate. And I think that's dangerous because it plays into a pattern we're already seeing in American life of increasing polarization, not just in the political sphere, but in the personal sphere. Literal marriages, only 1 in 5 is between people of differing political affiliations. That's a pretty troubling idea.
It's just interesting because, we come after the election where we're trying to come together. We just saw President Biden and President-elect Trump in the Oval Office trying to talk about just unity and moving forward. And then again, it just comes to rural versus urban when maybe there could be a way to reconcile and come together. Maybe I'm seeing a glass half full.
Meantime, Donald Trump made a triumphant appearance at the Ultimate Fighting Championship event, Madison Square Garden. Saturday evening, the president-elect watched the fights alongside Elon Musk, head of the UFC, Dana White, Speaker Mike Johnson there, among others. But the Trump bump, I guess you could say, also hit the sports world this weekend. Another sport. Take a look at the latest celebration craze. It's the NFL. Multiple players spotted doing the Trump dance after scoring a touchdown or making a big play. Is this a cultural shift here, Scott?
No,
he's
disgusting.
doing it now. Yeah.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
It's the only time I've ever seen Scott Bolden ape Donald Trump.
What do you mean by that?
It's crazy. He's got no rhythm, and they're just mocking him, basically.
You think they're mocking him?
No. I think they're mocking him because of the irony. But listen, he won into the spoils. The winner goes to spoils and stuff. He should stop that dance.
But no, he does that dance. He knows he's self-deprecating himself. He knows that.
I've never heard Donald Trump be self-deprecating.
Absolutely, he has.
Only a Republican would say that.
The man is capable of poking fun at himself, and he does it all the time.
Meantime, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on a mission to, quote, make America healthy again. But according to this post from Donald Trump Jr., that effort starts after a Happy Meal. The Post shows Don Jr. plus the president-elect, Elon Musk, RFK Jr., sitting down to McDonald's burgers. I saw this over the weekend, Kelly, and you got to wonder what's going through RFK Jr.'s head there.
I mean, yeah, he didn't even try to hide it, right?
Like, you can't hide it. What are you going to do there?
He's just like, I'm not eating this. I'm not having this McDonald's cheeseburger with the president and Diet Coke. But
he's not anti-fry. He just wants to see him fried in beef tallow. And he's not wrong. That actually is the healthier way to do it.
What do you think?
Malcolm Gladwell has studied that.
What do you think's going through his mind there?
I think that he's now part of the gang, and I suppose the price of admission for being a member of the gang, just being a Big Mac, is not the worst. I think
Thank you, sir. I have another.
I think it's hilarious. Tongue-in-cheek. I think it's hilarious.
Still to come here from the Hill. Who will the Florida governor Ron DeSantis pick to replace Marco Rubio's Senate seat? And will that person have Trump in their last name? And the White House asks for $100 billion in emergency funding for disaster recovery. Will the House take that up and give the president and many folks across the Southeast what they want? Plus, Trump vowing military force to carry out mass deportations of illegal immigrants. We go live with the former Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security here on the Hill. Also, don't forget to download the NewsNation app for more of all the big stories and to watch us anytime, anywhere. The Hill. Back in a few. Welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. The Pentagon fails a test while the Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has one of his own. Our Kelly Meyer joins us now with what's happening up on the Hill. Hello, Kelly.
Hey there, Blake. So, should the Pentagon watch out for Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy? Perhaps, as a new audit shows, the Pentagon is not able to fully account for the entirety of its more than $800 billion budget. That's the 7th consecutive year the Pentagon has failed the audit. As our partners at thehill.com report, the Pentagon says it's committed to achieving a clean audit by 2028. And back up on Capitol Hill, Congress now has a roughly $100 billion request. The White House asking Congress to approve emergency funds to help with the recovery from catastrophic storms, including Hurricanes Helene and Milton, which ripped through the Southeast. The request would shore up funding for FEMA's disaster relief fund. And as the Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is about to interview a Trump. Could be the case in Florida, as the governor says he will start talking with potential candidates to fill Marco Rubio's Senate seat when he presumably heads to the State Department. The president-elect's daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, who is also the co-chair of the Republican National Committee, is being talked about as potentially being one of the top choices to take Rubio's place. So that's what's happening up on the Hill, Blake.
Could you imagine that interview process? Ron DeSantis sitting down with Laura Trump, if there's actually an interview, and what that would be like?
Yeah.
And how do you say no to her at that point if you're the sitting governor?
And this is someone that Florida Senator Rick Scott is really pushing for. We've seen every day almost push. I mean, really all he can do is tweet about it. There's really not much more to say that Rick Scott has here, but he can keep putting it out there in front of the media. But he may be meeting with her. It's all happening, they said, likely in these next few weeks, with a pick coming likely in the beginning of January.
The dynamics here are fascinating because Rick Scott, senator.
Yep.
Ron DeSantis, governor, don't really get along.
Right.
There's an open seat that DeSantis fills. And by the way, and Scott, as you mentioned, is pushing for Laura Trump. Yeah. Ron DeSantis could do something really interesting because he's out of the governor's mansion.
Yeah.
He can't run again. He could put himself in Marco Rubio's seat. He could appoint himself.
Me.
Right. And not put Laura Trump in there.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's a couple other contenders there, but right. Laura might be one that he might interview. I mean, the pressure there to do it, we'll see.
His own chief of staff is a possibility as well. The lieutenant governor, you would think. We'll see how this all plays out.
Be interesting.
Kelly Meyer, thank you.
Appreciate
it.
To rapidly reduce inflation, I will end Kamala's war on American energy, and we will drill, baby, drill. We're going to drill, baby, drill.
All right, drill, baby, drill. That's the promise President-elect Donald Trump made to voters out on the campaign trail. And now that he's been elected, Trump is taking the next steps to carry out his agenda by tapping the fracking CEO, Chris Wright, for the energy secretary position. Fracking is a process for extracting natural gas by drilling thousands of feet into the ground. Now, as Inauguration Day approaches, the Biden administration, environmentalists, and oil companies are bracing for the return, expansion, and impact of oil and gas production. Here are two examples, for example, starting with shale plays, which is an accumulation of natural gas in the continental U.S. So this is what the map looks like right now. And this is from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, government administration. So this is obviously the continental U.S. All these areas that you see here on the map, for example, this is the intermediate depth, the oldest depth, so on and so forth. These are the areas where shale gas and oil extraction are in the continental U.S. right now. Just, again, this is a broad view here. Now let's go offshore for a second. And it's a much different story offshore. So when you look at the offshore map, okay, all this red, see there, red is off limits. So go to the West Coast, off limits. Go up here to the Northeast, off limits. This blue area, under review. And then you get an area down here that's open. More than 90% of the offshore area essentially is off limits at this moment. And you heard Donald Trump there. We know he's been president once already, right? But he says he is going to drill, baby, drill. So what could that look like? Joining me now is Mike Summers. He's the CEO and president of the American Petroleum Institute. Mike, thanks for being with us here on the Hill.
Blake, great to be with you.
You got it. What are you looking for in the new Trump administration? You obviously have a vested interest in this. If he does what you're hoping for, it would be what?
Well, we put out a 5-point roadmap for our energy future to ensure America's energy security and to reduce inflation. It can be found on API.org. It's a 5-point roadmap that says everything that we think the president should do.
Tell me about
to secure American energy leadership.
Tell me.
So one, the first thing they should do is to lift the pause on LNG export permits at the Department of Energy. We have to get that done as quickly as possible because our allies need American LNG. And by the way, the best part about that is that if you do that, if you're using American liquefied natural gas, you're cutting coal production throughout the rest of the world because you're replacing it with clean American natural gas. We need a permitting.
Yeah, let's leave it there. I know you can go through all five real quick, and you mentioned where to find it, but I got a few more for you before we run. Trump talked about the National Energy Council, right? When he nominated Doug Burgum to run Interior, he said he's going to start this National Energy Council. And here's what he said, Mike, in the announcement. He said the National Energy Council will consist of all departments and agencies involved in the permitting, production, generation, distribution, regulation, transportation of all forms of American energy. That sounds like a lot of government to me, Mike. Are you satisfied with that?
It is a lot of government.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we have a situation where all of these energy rules and regulations are spread out throughout the federal government. They're at Energy, they're at Interior, they're at EPA, they're at FERC, they're at all of these ABC agencies.
Right.
And what this National Energy Council is all about is making sure that they're coordinated. So we're very excited that Governor Burgum of North Dakota is going to have an opportunity to serve on this council, chair this council,
we need it,
make
though?
sure that all of the activities. We do need it. We need it desperately. Because when you think about the fact that the Department of Energy, while it has energy in its name, there are only a few parts of the energy system that it actually coordinates. It's the Department of Interior that has all of federal lands and federal waters. It's EPA that has environmental regulations. The Department of Energy only has the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the nuclear fleet, and it has a couple of other items. But we need really one coordinating body, the National Energy Council under President Trump, that'll help coordinate this and ensure that we can continue to produce for the American people.
All right, so I hear you just use the word produce and talk about production, right? Crude oil production. You know this, Mike, but for our audience here on NewsNation or those listening to us on SiriusXM, production's at an all-time high in the Biden administration. I want to show you a chart real quick. This is production over the last, call it 8 years or so. And you see the blue there, the United States, it was going up during Trump. Then there was COVID. There was an obvious pullback, right? But it's gone up during the Biden administration as well to an all-time high. Do you give the current administration any credit?
Well, what I would say is that the Biden administration deserves credit for not getting in the way of production on private lands, which is most of where that production has occurred, that increase in production has occurred. What they've done is they have sought to cut back production on public lands and in public waters. So we're excited about the opportunity to continue to develop public waters like the Gulf of Mexico and public lands like in New Mexico, the other side of the Permian Basin, because that's where they've really sought to stop production in the United States.
I think we're at like 13 million barrels. Yeah, I think let me leave you with this. I think we're at like 13 million barrels a day of production. Where do you think Trump gets it to? Crude oil.
Well, one thing I know is that the regulatory environment is going to be much better under an administration that seeks to promote the industry, not demonize the industry.
All right. I got to leave it there. Mike Summers, thank you for the time, sir. Appreciate it. Thanks for being with us here on The Hill this evening.
Great to be with you, Blake.
You got it. All right. Still to come here from The Hill. We're speaking with Trump's former DHS official, Ken Cuccinelli, about what the president-elect has planned for the border. There was a simple tweet today, or a truth, whatever you want to call it, on social media. Trump said, true, it's happening. What exactly he was referring to on the other side of the break. Stay with us. You're watching The Hill. On NewsNation, President-elect Donald Trump vowing to use the military, he says, potentially to carry out his plans for a mass deportation program of illegal immigrants when he takes office on January 20th, 2025. Now, this really shouldn't come as a surprise. Republicans have been talking about this for months, about the possibility. For instance, when I spoke with the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, back in May, he told me this. Do you think the military could be used?
Well, I do. I think desperate times call for desperate measures. The challenge we have, very frankly, is going to be finding and rounding these people up because they're being dispersed around the country, and DHS is not tracking them.
Joining me now, Ken Cuccinelli, former acting Deputy Homeland Security Secretary in the first Trump administration. Ken, thanks for being with us here on The Hill. Appreciate it, sir.
Good to be with you.
So what?
My pleasure.
What does it look like in your view? I know this is something that you've been advocating for, you've been researching. What do you believe this policy looks like come the end of January next year?
So I think the end of January and into February, you will see our military used between legal ports of entry, especially on the southern border, to finally gain control of that border. And so all immigration, all passage of any kind will pass through legal ports of entry only. And so it'll be under control, and people to get in will have to be legally allowed to enter. So that'll be step one.
Doesn't that, that sound aspirational when you say everyone? You really think that can happen?
Well, I don't think you ever reach 100% of anything, but certainly that's the goal. Some way, someone, somewhere could be missed. But the point is to make it impractical. If you're sitting in, pick a country in Central or South America, because they still have the biggest numbers coming into the United States, and you're asking yourself the question, am I going to spend my life savings on some coyote to get me into the United States when what I see happening at the border is a complete blockage? The answer to that is no. And it will, once it's clear to people who might come into this country that they, as a practical matter, can't get in, and you're right, it'll never be 100%, but it doesn't need to be to drive the numbers coming to the border down into the dirt. And he'll do that using the military between the legal ports of entry.
What parts of the military, what resources or assets? How does that happen?
Well, first of all, on the border, this is a very low. This is a physical presence of people and reconnaissance assets. You're not talking about tanks and planes and so forth. This is just having people there to stop others from entering the country, and you use the recon assets to know they're coming. That's all. That's what it looks like on the border. And in higher passage areas, there will be more folks there. And by the way, the Border Patrol will be there as well. Out in the much more difficult points of passage, out say in western Texas, for example, where the border is very difficult to pass, there will be a presence, but it will be a much smaller presence because that's all that will be needed to maintain security in those areas. And by security, I mean blocking people from entering the United States. That's
I want to ask you about what the governor there in the state of Arizona, Katie Hobbs, said today when asked about this possibility. Here's what she said. I'll get your reaction on the other side. She basically said, Ken, that really her state law enforcement officers weren't going to be involved in this. And I wonder, Ken, that if governors say, you know what, we're not going to be helpful, do you actually need state law enforcement and state police to carry this out? Or at the end of the day, Donald Trump is in charge of the federal aspects of the government and states never get involved to begin with?
Yeah, you don't need state help to do any of it, but particularly the border security is truly properly a federal responsibility. Texas has been taking steps using their self-defense powers under the Constitution, but it's been pretty meager, really. Where the state participation can really increase your efficiency is in the deportation effort, particularly with respect to anyone who comes into contact with their criminal justice system. And for all the tough talk coming from Governor Hobbs and Pritzker and the mayor of Boston and so forth, if Congress cooperates and makes their appropriations conditional on cooperation, which never happened in the first Trump term, then they're going to have to choose between getting federal money and actually assisting with the deportation, at least of criminal aliens. And by criminal, I mean people who commit other crimes after they enter the United States. Boston has been a hotbed of gathering of sex offenders who are here illegally. It's been quite incredible. And the fact that they have refused to cooperate has continued to make their children and communities unsafe.
Ken Cuccinelli, got to leave it there. Appreciate the time, sir. Thanks for being with us here on The Hill.
Good to be with you.
You got it. All right, full panel here with me now. Once again,
Nan, Niall, Kelly, Scott, hello. Scott, I was looking at Arizona, where Katie Hobbs said that today. Donald Trump won by that state by 5.5 points. He got 103,000 more votes last time. The Democratic candidate got 94,000 fewer. Prop 314 is a state crime for non-citizens to enter outside of ports of entry. That went 63-37. Without the backdrop in Arizona, how can the sitting governor sit there and look her citizens in the eye and say what she did?
Well, she can do it because she doesn't have any jurisdiction in regard to protecting that border or repatriating these immigrants that are coming over illegally. So she's right in that regard. But this is fraught with peril. What exactly are the duties and responsibilities of the military going to be, or the National Guard going to be? And what if you have a confrontation? Are they going to be able to use deadly force to keep people out? And by the way, when you keep them out, are you going to put them in camps in Mexico again? Lots of details need to be sorted out. I'd rather see the Republicans, now that they have control of all three houses, they ought to be passing legislation to increase money, to increase resources, technology, and what have you, because that alone will reduce the
You don't think anything's incumbent on Katie Hobbs? I mean, when you see what happened in Arizona?
Well, I see politically, but that doesn't create an obligation if her police force does not have the power or authority to repatriate people.
Let me ask you, Nan, because I hear that this is going to be a military presence and assets at the border.
Yeah.
That's in theory.
Right.
What happens if, in practice, it goes much deeper than that and Americans start seeing the military involved and they say, I don't know?
Yeah. Well, I think Scott's raised some excellent points. Obviously, if the military is expected to enforce our border, I would assume that means up to and including lethal force if necessary. That's why you have a military to apply violence where necessary. We hope it wouldn't come to that. The devil is in many details. I think the political pressure on someone like a Governor Hobbs is definitely there, but there is enormous national pressure on President Trump to get this right. And I do think that Scott is right, that the opportunity is there for Congress to pass a bill that will provide adequate support in all ways, including administrative judges, to adjudicate the cases that are pending.
If they're agreeing on that, Congress already passed the Republican version of H.R. 2, right? And that's the Republican wish list at the border. Is that where this is going here in Washington?
Well, I don't really see Democrats going for that, right? I mean,
and they've got the slimmest of margins in the House, too.
Exactly. So if you peel off a couple of votes, I think that becomes very problematic. You started off asking Ken Cuccinelli, what does this look like? And, of course, the president-elect's plan is to deport all illegal immigrants. He doesn't distinguish. What that looks like is there are more than 6 million U.S. citizen children who have an illegal or unauthorized family member. 1 in 25 American families has an undocumented family member. Are you going to use the National Guard on 1 in 25 American families? Once you get into that kind of granular and emotive detail, it becomes very problematic.
Right. I mean, this is something that President-elect Trump has been promising on the campaign trail. It's his number one promise. He wants to do it as soon as he gets in, retweeting it, retruthing that, saying true. But how exactly he's going to do it on day one, as he's also trying to get his defense secretary through the confirmation process, if he's talking about using the military, it just seems like there's going to be a lot of roadblocks, and exactly how he's going to deliver on this promise is something that we'll be watching for.
By the way, I would just note, too, that when it comes to polling on mass deportations, you bring up great points about, and I asked the question, how does it happen? What does it look like? The American public said
they do.
That they support the concept.
They do.
That they want it. They were polled earlier this year on it. They were polled. We saw it in polls later in this year. So the American public supports it. Donald Trump is going to do it. And to all of your points, there's a question of how does it happen.
But they got to do it the right way. And we haven't even talked about the litigation that's going to follow on this.
I think ACLU already came out today.
Absolutely. The courts are going to have a lot
to
say about this. And remember, due process still lives in this country.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Other side of the break, Leland Vittert, host of On Balance, joins me. All the big things before Donald Trump, right? So many of them. As the president-elect. Did you see what happened over the weekend with golf and who the president-elect was sitting next to and who he played golf with on Friday? What's that all about? Leland Vittert, host of On Balance, joins me on the other side of the break.
remarkable women from across the country. 125 trailblazers will be honored with a chance to win $25,000 for the nonprofit of their choice. Nominations open through December 20th. Go to newsnationnow.com to enter a remarkable woman today.
Here to the Hill on News Nation. So golf lover President-elect Trump appears to be moving the men, potentially. The big rift in the golf world, having met with the commissioner of the PGA Tour, Jay Monahan, on Friday, reportedly, and the head of the Saudi-backed fund that owns Live Golf, Yasser Al-Rumayyan. At separate meetings this weekend, the Trump-Yasser meeting was, of course, at the UFC event at Madison Square Garden on Saturday evening. Leland Vittert, host of On Balance, fellow golf aficionado, joins me. We should note Nexstar Media Group, the owner of NewsNation, also the majority owner of the CW Network, which broadcasts live tournaments. This is fascinating because you got the two big players with Trump, back-to-back days, one of them private, sort of a golf event, the other one very public out there at the UFC event. And this seems like, Leland, it's getting close to the finish line.
All right, so Donald Trump has MAGA, Make America Great Again. Maha, Make America Healthy Again.
Okay.
I've written up a new one.
What is it?
MGFA. I won't have a pronouncer for it.
Okay.
Make golf fun again.
And that's what you think he's trying to do here?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I think he's in the middle of all this, loves it, and who knows. But
And it would be hard to imagine someone who is enjoying themselves more than Donald Trump is right now. Look, the last 2 weeks of the campaign, 3 weeks you and I talked about this, he was really enjoying it.
You could tell he was feeling it then.
And it reminds me also of the 2016 transition when he showed up to the Army-Navy game in 2016 after he had won. Donald Trump enjoys the show. That's just what this is.
It is a little different transition, though. In the last one, we had Trump Tower, the elevator, who was going up, who was coming down. This one's a lot further distance, but yeah. We'll see how it all ends.
A lot further distance, and to be fair to them, so much better organized. Agree or disagree with the picks, like them, not like them, that may not be the issue. But in terms of having a direction where they're going and plotting that course,
been there, done that.
They're doing that.